Okay, on to the basic principles. So this is lesson three, and we're going to split this into a few different sections, finishing up with section 3E, which will cover all of the principles that we're looking at through section A to D. And this first video here, I want to start covering the idea of will and intent. And, you know, while there is lots of methods in mesmerism and hand passes and positions and different techniques to use and things like that, and the same can be said with hypnosis. There's various different types of induction. There's various different tools that we can use within the hypnotic toolkit. But a lot of this comes down to this idea of you need to go first. And in the hypnosis training that I got when I first qualified, one of the things that was really drummed into me was this idea that if I don't believe with every cell of my being that I can help this person, then I might as well just refer them to someone else because it's going to be a waste of my time and a waste of their money. And this is something that we really need to look at with mesmerism even more so because it's essentially a non-verbal or largely non-verbal modality. And when we look at the lessons that we've covered already, we've got this idea of Mesmer's mechanical fluid, um, this fluidum that penetrates through the universe, and that the magnetizer is this pump that effectively pumps the magnetic fluid through the subject and breaks through these blocks in a crisis and produces this healing effect. And when his student Posager comes along, he finds out that we don't need that idea of, and it's really just the will and intent of the operator that causes this to happen. So one of the first key, and this is the first principle, is the idea of will or desire and focus and intent. And when we look at this, there's this misconception in modern time that willpower is something to do with like grit and forcing things and pushing through. And if you just apply your will, you'll get it done. It's this idea of you know like strain and effort, and this is not the will of the magnetist. The will of the magnetist is a single pointed focus. If you're consciously holding on to the idea of leading this person into a trance or helping them heal from whatever issue they have, or even when you're working with yourself here, and this is largely in this free course really about self-healing and self-work and basic understanding of the principles of this. We're going to go into much more detail in this in the more advanced course, but um, if you've got a part of the back of your mind going, well, what if I'm not good enough? What if this doesn't really work? What if this is all just, bullshit, then there's two stations playing at once. And if you imagine having your radio on in the car and having two radio stations coming through at the same time, you wouldn't be enjoying the music, it would be probably so annoying that you would just turn it off or switch stations or put a CD on, or you know switch on the MP3 player these days. I don't know. So one of the most important aspects here is that will shouldn't be something that strains you. It shouldn't be this grit and determination. It should be something that's really direction. It's not forcing, it's not split, it's holding a thought form within your mind with an unwavering power. And you have to hold that through the whole session. It's not easy. It takes a level of discipline and presence. And this is why a lot of the stuff that we're going to be covering, especially in the more advanced course, involves cultivating that ability to hold your focus for long periods of time on a single subject. And this comes in really handy when you're dealing with actual hypnosis as well, like the verbal hypnosis, because a lot of what's going on behind the scenes is really holding that thought form. And in some of the energy healing modalities around the world that I've looked at, one of the ideas is we're holding generally one of two things. It's either an idea that the healing has already taken place and that's held through the whole session, or we're holding on to the idea that I would happily take away this person's pain so that they don't have to suffer it. But these thought forms, these ideas, these creations of will and intent within the psyche are held on to and in an unwavering fashion from the start to the end of the session. And the same thing happens, if we're doing a distant Reiki session or something like that, or a distant healing session with magnetism. I'm going to use these words interchangeably throughout this course because they are the same thing. They're different names by different cultures for the same thing. And as we saw in the scientific frame in lesson 2, there's this ability that if someone has a belief that they can heal or produce this effect, it creates this parasympathetic arousal even in the animal studies. Whereas if they don't hold on to that belief, that understanding, that thought form, then the parasympathetic arousal doesn't happen. So, we can see in that particular study with Reiki very clearly that the the belief, the faith that we can do this is very important. And if that faith wavers, if that faith falls, then the effect changes and we don't get the result that we're looking for. So the direction of will and desire and focus and intent is all something that needs to be cultivated and trained generally. There's very few people that are able to hold a thought form for any length of time really these days. And one of the things that I like to talk about is this idea that our beliefs are faith-based. I've spoken about this before in various places, but this idea that, okay, the sun is in the sky, our planet circles round it. All of these things are based on faith. We're trusting the science. We're trusting the fact that we've got satellites that are showing us this stuff. And in reality, we don't know. We've not stood on the surface of the sun. Allegedly we'd be burnt to a crisp. But I can hold an idea that instead of the sun being a ball of gas in a like nuclear fission reaction heating our planet and solar system, you can have an idea, a thought form, a belief, a faith that it's a giant pitch black alien holding a torch. Like whatever you want, you can make that and you can hold on to it as long as you like. And this is the power of stories and fairy tales and metaphor. If we're telling our children stories, I can remember my father was very good at holding the belief, holding the thought form, and making it feel real for me. And this was one of the beautiful things about my father that I still cherish to this day. And you know, I'm sitting here. I know I'm sitting here. This is a knowing. This isn't a belief. This is an empirical knowledge that I am sat here recording this video to help you guys hopefully understand a little bit more about how to work with this sort of thing. And there's various different ways of using this. So one of the old Huna ways, the Polynesian Hawaiian ways, is to create a thought form as you go to sleep at night of your ancestors, your guides, aliens, whatever you want, some entities coming and building a machine around your bed to heal you at night while you sleep. So you're setting up this thought form before you fall asleep. And then when you wake up, first thing you do when you wake up in the morning is you look at the machine in your mind. Now, you might not see the machine, you might be aphantasic, but getting a sense of that, getting an imagining of that machine as you wake up in the morning. And that cements that in and tells your body and your mind that this is what I want to work on through the night when I'm sleeping. And it may be that you've got a flu, or maybe you've got something more serious. But doing that repeatedly every night is building a thought form. And you're, by checking it in the morning, you're telling your consciousness that I don't want this to just be something that we do at night before I go to sleep. I want this to last through the night while I'm sleeping and heal my body, you know? So this is us starting to use will and intent and direction, desire, focus in a specific way towards our own self-healing. And the second principle is that the interpretation is optional. We can have a spiritual interpretation if we want, we can have a psychological interpretation, or we can have none at all. The method still stands or falls on the results that we get. So the faith and belief that we can produce this actually causes the shift. And it's like the idea of the placebo. You know, the in one of the comments on the in the main skool, there's a link to a BBC Horizon video on the placebo. And one of the things that they cover in that is this idea that even if the doctor tells the subject, the patient, that this is a placebo, this is just a sugar pill, but if you take it, you will be healed, and it still has that effect. So even if we know that it's a placebo, even if we know that it's just a suggestion, because our unconscious mind trusts this figure of authority, then we get the result. So the interpretation, the frame that we put round it doesn't really matter. What really matters is the faith that we put into it. And, this is really one of the keys to this is being able to control your faith. And I'm not talking about religious faith, I've covered this already. It's not a faith in a higher power coming along and helping you or healing you or taking away your addictions or, you know, miraculously healing your body or any of that shit. Excuse my language. But what it really is a faith in the ability that, you know, there's stories of people in the placebo group with stage 4 cancer, and the cancer disappears over a weekend when they're in the placebo trial. And, you know, if one person's body is capable of healing stage 4 cancer tumors in 3 or 4 days, then anyone's body is capable of it. It's about getting the ingredients of faith and rapport and belief and all of these things right. So, what we interpret as the cause behind that, do what you want, as long as you have faith in it. If you put faith in the spiritual frame, put faith in the spiritual frame. If you want to put faith in the scientific frame, put faith in the scientific frame. But if you want to put faith in the idea that if you give your subconscious a suggestion and really hold on to the idea that that suggestion will take hold, put on the faith of that, then the chances are you're going to get a result. You're going to get some form of change. So the the interpretation that you add to it, that's yours. You can own that in any way you want. And it doesn't really matter what it is, as long as it fits with your belief system, your faith system. Because, as I've covered already, belief is faith based. Knowing is empirical knowledge, but belief is all faith based. You know, everything that you've learned from someone else instead of from direct experience, you're trusting the faith that they were telling you the truth, that they know what they're talking about, that there's an accuracy in their message. So the next principle really is the frame, and this is, the I touched on this already, the knowing that you would, with compassion, take away the subject's pain. And, you know, largely along the same lines as the interpretation, the frame that you apply to it is, it's really up to you. It's the stance that you're bringing to it. And it's, again, if you doubt it, if you're doubting that frame, that interpretation, then you're not going to get the results. You have to trust the process. These are the things that people say over and over again, but they don't really explain what they mean by it. And I think it's really important to explain what they mean. If we're working with a client and we need to have a level of rapport, not with their conscious mind, but with their subconscious mind. We need to be presenting a frame with our client that fits their belief system in a way that allows them to have the opportunity to heal. Our job as therapists, as hypnotists, as mesmerists, as facilitators of change is to open a space to allow them to heal. And, you know, how we go about that is through the interaction with the client and gaining rapport. But no one really talks about the idea of self-healing, not in the modern times in this sort of way. And in the Hawaiian system, in the ancient Huna system, one of the first exercises of working with your mind, with your whole mind, rather than just the conscious mind, is the befriending the subconscious or the low self or whatever you want to call it. And there's this idea that there's a super conscious part of the mind, and this is covered in things like Jung's work and stuff as well. But this idea that in order to be able to access those higher aspects of mind, we need to have a level of rapport with the subconscious, with the unconscious mind. And there's various exercises for befriending your subconscious mind. And I'm of the opinion, and how I work with my clients is teaching them how to gain a level of rapport with their own subconscious mind. So we can go into that a little bit in some of the exercises that we'll get on to later on. But for now, just think of that idea. So if you've spent your entire life constantly telling yourself that you're not good enough, or telling yourself you're never going to smoke again and then going and smoking again, or you're never going to drink again and going and drinking again, or oh no, I'm only going to eat good food now and then stuffing your face with junk food, you're giving mixed messages to your unconscious. You're not building rapport, and there's aspects of your life that you think of as fond memories that your unconscious might not necessarily agree with. And vice versa, there's maybe memories that you don't necessarily hold very dear to yourself, but there may be something in them that there's a part of your unconscious that really loves that message, that memory. And when we get onto these exercises of befriending your subconscious or gaining rapport with your unconscious mind, I'll share some more stories into that. But there's it's really interesting when you start going down that road. Let's leave it at that for now. So the the simple reduction in this, the technique is not first. The focus and direction and will and intent, the ability to hold a single thought form, to hold it in a state of balance and ease so it flows. So there's no tension, there's no grit, there's no forcing of it. This is where we start with mesmerism or self hypnosis and any healing, really. If your mind's split, if you're playing two stations at once, the noise doesn't work. And if you're playing those two stations at once, then you're not in rapport with your unconscious mind. The way we start to play that one station at once is through gaining rapport with your unconscious. So we'll move on in the next lesson to the idea of looking at a little bit of presence. So I'll check back with you in that, and yeah, hope you enjoyed this. Peace and love.